Hello and welcome to this BCS futureELITE webinar. futureELITE has been designed as a forum for inspirational leaders in the world of IT to share their career stories and offer advice to ambitious fellow professionals. And today we welcome Neil Walker, the Head of Architecture at Covéa Insurance, and Jason Root, an Enterprise and Infrastructure Architect at Burberry. We'll hear from each speaker in turn, and then in the latter part of the session, we'll have questions for the speakers. Please use the chat function in your control panel to submit questions as they come to you through the talks, and we will reach as many as we can before we close the webinar at 7 o'clock. So can I please welcome our first speaker, Neil Walker. Start with why, the difference between innovation and invention. Neil.
Thanks, John. I think I am able to share my screen. Just bear with me. Yes, I think I am. Hopefully you can all see my slides. Hi everybody, thanks John. My name is Neil Walker, Head of Architecture for Covéa Insurance in Covéa Digital. Just a brief bit of background to myself. I've been with Covéa about 2.5 years. I'm a father of 2 kids. I've been in IT, technology, architecture over 25 years. I've done every role from junior developer up. I've been recognised quite often in the field of architecture, but more importantly service orientation and distributed computing, which is more around how we get to a what I call that the newer technologies we're looking at adopting in most industries to help support digital initiatives and help drive out emerging solutions for our businesses. What I wanted to talk to today was to help describe a bit more from my perspective and how I see technology and certainly architecture around talk about innovation and invention and it's important, the importance of knowing the difference, especially when working through your career, whatever role you're in, and why it's vitally important to start with the why for what you're actually developing or testing or engineering or architecting to ensure you're focusing on how you're taking your relevant code development solutions forward. The reason it's important for me personally to clarify the difference between innovation and invention, I've just put up a couple of descriptions there for you guys to look at, is innovation is really about how we drive things in new markets in new ways. And sometimes that's quite disruptive and sometimes that impacts on not just technology, but your product, it could be a process, it could be how you actually make technology readily available to people to work differently. Now, difference that's worth considering when you're working through technology or if you're an architect looking at solutions, it's quite different from innovation. Innovation is about the notion of doing something different, fundamentally to change, than not about doing the same thing better. These definitions are not mine. I would recommend that there's some really good materials out there. Some of these definitions are the ones that have meant most to me. And largely have come from some of the work from Tim Wu, who's one of the leading evangelists on innovation. But I tend to apply this mostly in my role today as a head of architecture, but also in my role and when working with a number of different people. So why is this all important? Why should I want to talk about this? Well, when I think about innovation, I'd like to bring myself to my role. And I love the film Back to the Future. I love the idea of how you could, the film fundamentally something I love, my children love, we watch it all the time. And it's all about how do you actually get to something that is so innovative. It actually drove change significantly. But when you think about that time machine, that DeLorean, everybody wants one. It's great to do the innovation. It's great to have the invention of how you would build that product, how you design it technically, and appreciate it's a film metaphor I'm showing you here. But fundamentally, to drive innovation, you have to know not just what the product you're building, but why you're doing it, and more importantly, when you've got that product, how you're going to take that market to do things differently. And as an architect, that's something I really endorse, especially in the people I work with. So the reason it's important to start with why is we start looking at how we move through innovation. And one good guide I recommend and use is looking at the law of diffusion of innovation, whereby new technologies, new products, new solutions, as they go through the market, move through key layers of adoption. In order to get mass market success of any new invention or any new technology, you need to get past that tipping point of between 15 and 20%, where you start to hit the majority. And it's those innovators and those early adopters that are willing to look at things differently, take a different perspective, consider a new norm, consider how you would take that time machine or that innovative idea that's going to change the world and move it into an area where the market is freely and readily available to want to take that. And that's when you start to get into a market success, or I think what Geoffrey Moore calls it, is crossing that chasm of that 15 to 20% of market penetration. And you need those innovators, you need those early adopters, wherever it's in my role or whether it's in working, but more importantly, how I thought for years about technology to help you get to a place to provide the right disruption solutions for your business or for your given projects or engineering that you're working on. So, you know, technology, strategy, and that innovation, it's everywhere. I see it everywhere in where I work, in my life, how I am as a person. And I'm just going to take a couple of slides out to just talk about how I perceived it in a day in the life of me. So I'm just going to introduce you to my daughter. This is Meryl. This is my daughter, Meryl Walker. Unfortunately, many years ago, she had an accident and broke her arm. And whilst we were going through this process, just before she started school in Leeds, I recall when I went through that process and how technology was around me and around her and how it helped develop her or not. She did get better eventually, bless her, and she did recover fully, but she went through quite a bit of an experience, as did I. But when I went through all of the technologies that were supporting me when I went through that, I recall when we went through the numerous x-rays using the Super M8 GCP radiogram, a legacy piece of technology. It's stable, it's been around for years. But without that technology, I would not have had the support I needed to help support my daughter for what she was going through. It's not digital, it's not necessarily something that's a time machine, but it's such a level of dependency for me in that moment that piece of technology supported me in terms of my life and how I saw it. And I was grateful that such tech is there in the market. At the same time, how in Leeds teaching hospitals they manage their assets and how they look after the equipment to make sure that we support all assets, however small that may be, even if it's the plug to power that device. I was dependent on that at a critical part in my life. Software asset management, managing your technology assets is hugely important and keeping them afresh. The process of what we went through, me and my daughter, as we went through, how do I look at the maturity and assess a given event, is really important when looking at technology and making decisions, just as it was for me at that time in how I was working with this situation and understanding how can I assess and validate a given environment. I use a number of times different technology radars at how support the decisions I'm making. But here is just another example of how the same thing applies in the real world and how I perceived it. As I was mentioning earlier, innovation refers to the notion of doing something different to change, rather than just doing the same thing better. Whilst I was in the environment I was in, I recall that there were some desktop solutions that were deployed directly in the room that I was working with my daughter. This is about 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning. And where I was needing technology to maybe help me, it wasn't really helping me in that environment. It's a fresh looking desktop, the network cable isn't even plugged in, wasn't in use. What I needed was not a technology solution to help support that environment I was in. But here's a good instance where in my life, when I needed technology, I didn't require it. What was the value I needed was something to support my environment. Deploying that technology there didn't really add any value to me. But one thing I did notice when I was going through this was one of the innovative solutions that was demonstrated. 2005 is quite a bit a while ago, but relatively recent. And this was just the simplest of ideas, the simplest of solutions that helped me think, how do I think about technology when I'm developing myself or my role? This is quite simply a protective measure that keeps cables off the floor, yet it was a highly innovative solution. It helped significantly impact me, the staff, the people around me, and it was such a simple idea that it was recognized for innovation in that environment I was in. While I'm working through the weeks I was going through this, it really resonated with me how I think about technology. Is it better that I need that desktop when I really need probably other things in that room? But I certainly need solutions like this, as did the environment I was in. And that's what I mean about doing things better to change. It wasn't about the technology, it was about changing the environment. Luckily, she was fine and managed to get back to school, to start school on time. Bless her, and she made a full recovery. But just on a personal note, how I perceive technology around me is constant. It's always around us, and where those opportunities are, whether it's in your role as an engineer or elsewhere, if you're an architect, developer, engineer, how do you perceive the problem? Do you start with why you need this technology? Do you start with why it's relevant to the solution you're delivering? And do you start with, is this about inventive, making something better? Is this innovative, significantly change? I've been here many times before. I think certainly we have been over a number of years. So I wanted to have a little bit of a quiz based on invention and innovation. I'm happy to look at some of the chat posts that may come up here, but similarly, I'm more happy to pick it up at the panel at the end. Just move back to my presentation. So the world's first smartwatch, which I will add that I'd say it was something that definitely changed the thinking in the market, the Seiko, and what it did was allow to have multifunctional devices. If you think about where we work today with iWatches and different devices, would we consider this as something that was an innovative solution that changed the way we worked, or would you consider it as something that was inventive? I'm interested in what you think when you think about technology. Is this something that opened up the thinking, but it certainly didn't ship a number of units that would actually make it a technology success? But it's a great piece of invention as a good example. Does it give a great user experience? Was it something that functionally that was accurate? I'm not sure how many people need a scientific calculator up their arm, but if you try to buy one of these on eBay today, I think you'd be spending the best part of, well, 500 to 1,000 pounds. Does anyone have a view in terms of how they see technology in their role? Would you consider something such as the world's first smartwatch from Seiko as inventive or innovative? And how you think about your role when starting with why? So I'm happy to pick up any comments in the chat, happy to pick up later. Another good example, I'm not sure if this is something that resonates with everybody, is a Sony Walkman. Again, a great piece of technology. It was absolutely seen to be a groundbreaking solution. It was heavy, it sat on your waist. But the first responses of this technology innovation, the retailers weren't keen on it. It didn't actually ship that many products during the summer of 1979. More importantly, when it first actually went to the market, it only actually shipped about 10,000 units. But what happened was the environment changed and people grabbed hold of this product and started to adopt it on their terms without any marketing, without any specific publicizing about the product. And it became something that a certain demographic would like to use and started to develop a product recognition and a brand. The initial batch didn't sell many units, and Sony would actually look at pulling this piece of technology. But by the time it went from its initial launch in June, when it got to August, it had sold 200 million units. Partly that is to do with the innovative nature of how people adopted it, not just about the what in terms of the technology. Wonder if anybody managed to recall Apple Newton. This was the first technology product that went to market to look at handwriting recognition. Similarly, a technology-led product that tried to solve a given problem. But by the end of its initial launch, it actually only sold about 60,000 units, and it didn't do well at all. Unfortunately for Apple, they managed to recover from this, but what they sold, over 60,000 units per day, was about how many iPhones they, 60,000 units that year. They sell that many iPhones now per day in terms of the capabilities of those innovative products. So why is innovation hard? Innovation? Well, it's not just about the technology. There's been primitive technologies been developed in terms of access to new networks and new channels. And certainly back in the day when AM radio went to market as the chosen network for communicating all news and media broadcasting, it was adopted around the world. When FM radio was first discovered, it was seen as a huge disruption to a technology market. In those early adopters did not adopt this solution. In fact, it took 20 years before FM radio became the prevalent media to communicate media, music, technology. And that was because the disruptive nature of that innovation around how it could be applied never got out of that early adoption phase. So technology, strategy, and innovation, it's everywhere. It's how you think about your solutions, whether it's in your project you're working or in your given squad, if you're working through a given change. And it's about thinking about where you see it. I see it everywhere in what I'm doing. The process is an innovation. The process of building a repeatable product quickly that can universally be applied, demonstrated as a brand, is hugely innovative. This is a day out in Scarborough, if anyone recognises it. If you ever go to Scarborough and go to the fairground, what you see there is a financial model. It's very similar to what you would respectfully see if you started to move to a more cloud-based solution, whereby you can take a capability and apply that universally in a financial terms, whether you want to acquire tokens and buy experiences or not. This is exactly the same as how you may adopt certain modern solutions around cloud, but it's always been there. This is a business not far from me where I live in Leeds, whereby a local hairdressers was hugely innovative. They had far more space than what they needed. So they promoted renting a chair for people to come in and actually, what I would call it, a hybrid capability and how a hybrid cloud solution would work, whereby you can have multi-tenanted solutions of people working together. This is a hugely innovative idea in the business. This is no different to what you would think about the adoption of cloud. How would you look at hybrid cloud? What did it mean to your business? The security concerns you need around it, how the technology can be shared. Just finally for me, in terms of thinking about when you're in your role and how I've operated from junior developer, certainly when I've been working either as an engineer over the many different innovations and technology changes I've been through, it's not just about thinking big. Quite often we can think about the bigger goal in front. I think it's as much important about thinking about the smaller, more incremental things you can apply today to deliver immediate value. And whether I've been through the dot-com startup era in the late 90s, when I was working through how do we implement what was then the penetration of online capabilities, to where we are now today, when we're working through more digital disruption. It's not just about thinking big innovation. Innovation is all around us, whether you're either an engineer working through what's the most efficient way to engineer my software, test it, automate it, or deliver it. And this always helps me in my thinking when I think about the entire internet. It's about 540 billion trillion electrons, which is altogether in mass terms about 50 grams, or about the weight of a strawberry. If you're thinking about the impact that capability has had in terms of driving future change, especially considering how we work today, both in terms of technology or just the business and its operating model, it's about thinking around what can I do right now today in terms of innovation, or am I changing the fundamentals of how I can move out of an early adoption phase of a product through technology and architecture, or am I just improving things currently of how they are? That's the end of my slides. I went through it quite a bit at pace. There were some opportunities there to pick up some chats, or we can move that through towards for the end for the panel discussion. Thanks for listening. I'm happy to pick up any questions now or later on. Back to you, John.
Thank you for that, Neil. That's brilliant. There are lots of comments. For example, Evans says the Seiko watch is inventive. Steve points out that the Walkman was innovative. It changed how we listen to music. Mohammed says, I think it's more inventive, but was the demand there for the Seiko watch? Scott Munnings says, those solutions are innovative as they highlighted a need before the demand demographic was there. It was just poorly timed.
Yeah, agree largely with all those comments. I think there's a certain point. Sorry, John.
I beg your pardon. Go on, you speak.
It's more akin to like the comment around the Seiko watch. It absolutely opened up perspectives. People have never seen that before. Never thought the concept of a multifunctional device on your wrist. There's a certain element of technology investment that needed to happen to open up those that different way of thinking. The Seiko watch hadn't done that. There's a lot of other products and technology wouldn't have come as a consequence of that. But did it change the market on its own? No, it didn't. I would call it more an alpha solution that actually proven the art of what is possible with the technology.
Well, there's some fantastic questions that we can follow up with in the Q&A session at the end. But for the time being, thank you, Neil. That's a fascinating take on how we should think as architects. Thank you. Jason, can I hand over to you? Architecting your own career, a history lesson. I'll hand over control to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason.
I'll see if I can work out my technology now for sharing the screen. Hopefully you can see that. So good evening, everybody. My name is Jason Root. I'm an infrastructure architect, enterprise architect, working for Burberry. A little bit about me, first of all. There we go. I'm 48 years young. Lived in Wakefield. Born and bred Yorkshire lad. Typical 2.1 family. An avid motorsport fan, and I like my weight training when we're not all in lockdown. So I want to cover really around how I became an architect and some of the values that I now hold being an architect. So as I said, I've been in the IT industry for 30 years now. So which is an amazing feat. And originally started way back, leaving school. I didn't want to go into college. I didn't want to go to university. I didn't want to follow all these sort of the limited routes that there were back then into what would become an IT career. So the only options were what they used to call a youth training scheme for those of us that remember them. And I started on a youth training scheme around City and Guilds for word processing and spreadsheets of all things, which was Lotus 123 for anybody that can remember. So off the back of that became my first experience of networking, and I was involved on an old Novell network, which I used to do data entry for onto a database system. Got conversing with the software developer that had come in at the time to modify and improve the system. And I effectively went and worked for this guy on a work placement for a period of time. That led into becoming a junior programmer for RPG2 and System 36 and the S400s. And I became working for an IBM reseller in the early 90s. PCs and networking back then didn't really exist. Windows didn't exist. It was all DOS and command line functionality, which is why mainframe was always the chosen platform of choice back then. And as PCs started to emerge, I took an interest and saw that that was a direction in which I thought IT generally would work for the smaller businesses and mid-sized businesses, as opposed to the enterprise scale that System 36 and AS400 would deliver. So that's why I moved. So I moved into PC networking, and I had my first experience of networking, and a lot of the technologies that we use today are still underpinned by all those same architectures that existed back then. And I moved through from 1990 through into around 2002, doing a number of roles on PC engineering, networking, moved into pre-sales technical consultancy. But I had one driver in all that was the passion for technology. I loved the technology that I was working with. I loved, going back to Neil's point, the innovation that was happening back then. It was a really interesting time to be involved. So it was hard work, and you know, anybody that tells you that becoming an architect is an easy path, or to become a good architect is an easy path, is not the case. There's a lot of hard work and preparation that goes in to become an architect. You really need to build up a good knowledge base and skill set and understanding of the underpinning technologies, especially if you're going to be a solution architect. And I'll cover a little bit more about that later. So later moved on from pre-sales technical and effectively working in the value add chain up to that point when I moved over into the customer side around 2008 and want to see what it was like working at the other side of the fence rather than doing pre-sales consultancy for thousands of businesses, rather be the one business and focusing on their technologies. So I came and worked as an infrastructure manager there for around 8 years with the team, did a number of data center migrations and planning, and deployed quite a few platforms in my time while I was there. All the time, all these experiences build towards the understanding of becoming an architect. And then towards the end of that role was when I first transitioned my first true architecture role. I became the technical architect at NServe at the back end of 2007. And that was my first foray into architecture. I then moved into solutions architecture around early 2015 in financial services, and built out some standards and policies while we're there, and deployed some key systems. Then in 2017, I moved into a credit reference agency where I moved into infrastructure architecture specifically. Obviously carrying on my skill sets and knowledge from the previous 20x years that I've been there, helped me drive the strategy and the architectures for that business. And then 2018, I joined Burberry as the infrastructure architect. I've since then moved from there into an enterprise architecture role, leading technology for infrastructure across Burberry globally. So that gives you an overall of where I've come from. It sort of highlights that there's a lot of knowledge, skill set, and time being put into my capabilities as an architect, and some of those core values that I see are always needed when you're an architect. So first, as I said, is knowledge. You really have to understand the area that you're working in. So whether you want to be an infrastructure architect, or you want to be a solutions architect, or a cloud architect, or developer, you've got to really understand those technologies. And second, I mentioned before, is passion. You spend a lot of time at work. In 30 years, I've spent a lot of time at work and put a lot of long hours in over that time. But there's always that passion there for that innovation, again, as Neil said earlier, and still wanting to drive business value and see the results and the outcomes of what you deliver as an architect and the direction. So I would say one word of advice is do what you enjoy. Pick a field if you want to move into architecture that you've got a passion for. Thirdly is around trust. So with anything as an architect, you're in a position of trust. So people expect when you are proposing solutions and working in a team, there's got to be trust there. I've worked in numerous teams over the years and always found that the teams where you have a close working relationship with are always the ones that you deliver best, always drive the right value and enjoy working, to be honest. So nobody likes working in an environment that's difficult. And lastly is balance. So as I said, working for 30 years and put a lot of long hours in, there's a realization that work-life balance is really important. You've got to maintain your energy levels, and to do that, whether it's like me, downtime of socializing or spending time with your family or watching motorsport, you've really got to understand that life is not just about work. It's a symbiotic relationship. So you really would ensure that the early years you probably have to put a lot of time in, but remember that you've got to look after yourself more than anything else. So that's the end of my slide deck. I just wanted to cover a little bit about my current role and just some general questions for you guys out there. So obviously within the current situation that we've found ourselves in, I wanted to know what are your focuses at the moment from a business perspective. Where do you see the working relationship and ways of working are going to go? Where we're going to be in 1 year's time, where we're going to be in 5 years' time. So any thoughts on that? I'd be interested to know. And one of the other things is working in architecture. You've got to be also a bit of a diplomat. You'll in any working career, you're always going to come across people that don't share the same values or the same direction. So it's always trying to understand what the business drivers are and what you're trying to achieve from a strategic perspective. It's difficult in a smaller business as it is equally difficult in an enterprise. I've found over the years that sometimes even working in a small business, the challenges are greater because you've got less people to actually make decisions. So I would probably want to know is, have you found any difficulties in your ways of working? Have you got any words of advice yourselves or any experience that you'd like to share? And lastly, I probably would like to say that over the past 2 years working for Burberry, I've understood that teamwork and a sense of achievement comes hand in hand. We've delivered some private large projects in Burberry over the last 2 years and over sort of my career, but to work in a company that's very open and interested in innovation and wanting to be a leader in digital technologies really proves that there's still that drive out there and passion for technology. There's a lot of businesses that don't always understand the need or the value in technology, and it's difficult in those situations to derive some real value. So that's it from me. So any questions or that we want to cover? Back to you, John.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you very much for that. That was fascinating. And there are a lot of questions coming in. So we'll get to those, I hope, if we can just master the technology. Ian will come back, I know. Neil even. And you'll have to bear with me while I peer at my screen and pick up the questions. Bear with me a minute. I've got one from a colleague of yours, Jason here, Ian Davis. He says, I worked with Jason as part of an architecture team previously. Hi, Jason. I just wanted to ask you how your views and methods have evolved through your career to the current day in terms of winning over support from others within the business on architecture solution proposals. What do you say to that?
Hi, Ian. Yes, it's around 4 years ago now, coming up to the last work with Ian. So things have changed a lot in that time. I've learned so much around understanding people, and I think there's a term about active listening, which is to sit and listen to what somebody's got to say rather than you thinking about what you want to say. Usually, if you take the time to sit back and just listen first, your responses are usually taken better than just charging in with what your views are. So I'll probably say from that perspective, and I sort of understand what he's alluding to, is that it can be difficult when you're dealing with certain people, but active listening is a key to good communication.
Neil, do you have a view on that? Oh, Neil, you're muted.
You think I'd have worked that out after lockdown, man? I think there's a number of crossovers between what Ian's mentioned in my piece around, a large part of an architect, and I think we can work on technology on its own and develop things, but it's about taking people forward with it. It's as much about people and process as it is what you're architecting. So, referring to being diplomatic, building acceptance, building interest, these are all things that need to come from an architect. In my career, if you focus on the technology alone, I say to a lot of people, in this fiesta of everything that we're working through, that's got so many different stakeholders and people engaging, you've got to focus on the why and take people on that journey and influence them. And sometimes it's not just about technology. It's not enough to be right. It's not enough just to be correct. You've got to be able to look at, how do I get everyone to come with me with that change?
Yeah.
Now we've got several questions about remote working. We'd better get those out of the way. A good one. I agree, says Mike Prothero, with your work-life balance. How has your experience changed following remote working? And how do you balance architecture, he also asks, with strategy and service delivery or focus of tactical challenges? Two different questions there. Can you deal with that, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, working from home, actually, for us from an architecture perspective, hasn't really changed, mainly because part of our team is Leeds-based and part are London-based, so we're used to working remotely with each other. I think what I would say is that we try to engage and also have social events outside of just the work meetings. It's important to keep those relationships going, and just from a point of view of keeping the team together. Now, from a delivery versus strategy perspective, I think everybody is probably in the same situation at the moment. People are more focused and pulling back from the strategic directions and focusing on the tactical cost-saving initiatives at the moment. You know, we've seen it within Burberry and other businesses that we speak to. So I'd probably say that's where our focus is at the moment.
Neil, what's been your experience?
Yeah, it's there's a number of, I think, echo everything Ian's just said. It's some of the things that I've been doing to help support my architecture team is we introduce, I talked about family a lot in mine. We introduce, you know, sometimes we've had calls where you've been distracted by your child or something's happening, and sometimes that comes into that space, and rather than it being, you know, that's not appropriate, it's kind of welcoming it. I think I think at one point I had my daughter singing Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious behind me while I was actually trying to have an architectural meeting, but it's not something that's seen as inappropriate. It was something that came part of to the role. So it was really important to bring people. And then one other thing we do with the architect team is I always have a check-in, just 5 minutes in the morning. How are you doing? You feeling well? Are you taking time out? You know, it's not about those hour meetings. And occasionally we do something called a slint, which is a get together where we actually focus on non-work things and just share how we're coping. I believe it's a strong part of the role, especially in modern times, to focus on helping the well-being of our others, whether architects or anyone.
Let's move to a different question. Lambros asks, given the historic failures of some innovative ideas and products, how do you sell innovation to stakeholders?
Oh, that's a good question. And I would say that if there's a book you can go and get to pick up and read it and do that every time, be very, very rich. From an architectural perspective, can go to your standard boilerplate, strong stakeholder management. There's an element around from an architectural point of view about developing the why, what you're doing. So if you've got an innovative idea, you've got to produce it quick. If you've got an innovative idea, you want to demonstrate it quickly. You've got to show the value of what it means to the business. And then you've got to ensure that it can get grasp of how it could take a vision forward. And I think more importantly than ever, it's about inclusion. Not being precious about what it is technically. Invite people in, come and contribute. We think this is an idea. Is it worthwhile? What would you do to change? You know, that's as a theme, you know, I would say, but it is probably one of the most challenging aspects of an architect, developing the why.
Yeah, we've, you know, I think with innovation, it's not just an architect's job. Innovation comes from everybody. Everybody is responsible for innovation in the business, and sometimes you can get value from innovation in just something small process. And for example, you know, we had a process in one of our manufacturing plants which somebody used to do all the time with spreadsheets and was a laborious task. Yet, you know, from an innovation point of view, a small team just got together and used Power Apps and now have delivered such an efficient process there and freed up so much time for those people. And it's only affecting 2 or 3 people, but the knock-on effect of that and the value out of it, you can't measure. So if you did that exponentially across the business, how much value you're going to drive. So yeah, innovation I see has been absolutely something you open up to everyone, and just say invite people to be innovative and come forward with their ideas. You know, we always know there's going to be those ideas that are a little bit ridiculous or we can never achieve, but never say no.
Yeah.
More of a queer question here. Nick Smith asks, do you believe that to be a strong enterprise architect, you must come through the technology route? And he explains that he's a business architect and has been for 7 years, and previously for 3 years before that, a BA, but never a developer or anything particularly technical. So he doesn't have great depth of knowledge. What do you think about that, Jason?
I would probably say yes and no. So it depends on the role, and I think everybody's got their own experiences and everybody's got their own backgrounds. So in whatever background you come from and into an architecture role, you're going to bring something to that role. So sometimes a view of somebody that's not being an engineer or a developer is actually better, because they could potentially analyze a situation more from a user standpoint. I mean, true techies are always going to go to technology first, naturally. I mean, you pull yourself back from it as an architect and obviously take a rational view of it, but I think you're naturally driven that way. So certainly I think having a mix of a team of people that has got skill sets historically and people that have just come from a business background or BA background, it all just adds value.
Neil, your view?
Yeah, it's I certainly think there's no sort of grace that you need to come from a technology background. A large part of being an architect is as much not just looking at the tech. How can you be innovative and drive change from a commercial aspect is a big one. They could deliver a lot of value to the business, knowing the business and knowing where they're currently at on their change curve and where they need to go, and being able to translate that for technologists is a huge skill. It's hugely critical in business architecture, and sometimes without that missing, it really is a key gap that needs to happen.
There's a question for you, Jason, from Olu. How have you found navigating interdepartmental communication and collaboration in heavily siloed companies?
Hi, Olu, another one of my previous colleagues. I think working at Burberry has probably been the largest business I've worked for, and there are hundreds and hundreds of teams. I think it's again, it comes back to that communications piece and being able to reach out to people. I think with technology today and obviously conferencing, it's a lot easier to be able to speak to people. I think making yourself approachable as well is always a good start. It comes back to that trust piece I was talking about earlier. You know, if you build up a reputation in a business as a go-to person, people will come to you naturally, and those barriers tend to drop. If you understand what their needs and their requirement, you and have a sympathetic ear, then I tend to find that that's always the best way to engage is you know, listen first.
Neil, do you agree with that? Yeah,
absolutely. It's about knowing when to take on feedback and knowing how to take on the right input from different areas. There's different departments and interactions across them. They see things differently. A good part of enterprise architecture is understanding all different viewpoints and bringing that together and building a consensus across those departments to make a unified view. Again, touches a little bit on the previous question. It's a massive skill of an enterprise architect, hugely critical.
Here's a completely different question from Alex. Neil, for you, what do you think the next big innovation is in insurance?
Oh, that might be one of my colleagues. Thanks, Alex. I think there's some there are some big innovations and I can see moving forward, and insurance as a market is definitely up there as industries that are ready for disruption. I would say on a technology level, the ability to reuse a lot of our data to make a better customer experience. And I think looking at how insurance will change at a micro level, people will want to look at insuring differently, whether it's for the next 30 minutes or whether it's for the next year. So it's being able to offer more specific products to suit a customer experience, and the technology to support that. It will mean far more abilities for rapid change. So the ability to introduce things like DevOps, DevSecOps is usually important, being able to change quickly. I also think that there is a lot of challenges when you think about architecture, certainly in commercial and procurement side, about how we best manage and get value there as well. It takes a lot of skill to support that. But I would say for me, some of the data innovations that are coming along out of data science, machine learning, and looking at how we can develop unique insight to better offer a unique experience for a customer would be the one I'd be, I'm looking at a lot myself, and I could see making quite a disruptive change.
Fantastic, thank you for that. Shrikant asked a different question. He explains that he's working mainly in an agile environment where he's delivering small increments iteratively. Each delivery does not have much architectural work and only changing logic on existing components. He says, what is the future for architecture, for the architecture role in agile methodology? Jason, what do you think?
Oh, thanks for that one.
You can go first, Jason.
It's evolution again. It is always difficult. I mean, the traditional waterfall method of a project lifecycle, and obviously now with DevOps and Agile, completely turns it on its head. I think where architecture sits in the new spaces is around setting the governance and the standards in those areas, and helping people conform to those standards, whilst also allowing that agile and continuous pipeline delivery, because trying to fit traditional methods into agile just doesn't not work.
Neil.
Yeah, so that is probably one of the questions to talk about most. And I've got multiple perspectives. To Jason's point, he's right. That traditional architectural role is very much geared around the value of things up from first. Agile is very much in the cycle of delivery and being in the team. So as architecture will evolve, as it's always evolved, and I think so will agile, so will methodology, so will how we develop. I think Prince 2 as a methodology was 22 years old before it changed and started to decrease. The Agile Manifesto is over 15 years old. So, my point is, what's a post-agile world going to look like for all of us as well? So, to my presentation, change is happening all the time. I do believe architects need to have value if you're working in a tribe and squad. And quite often I see, just-in-time architectures being key. And architecture is more around supporting and framing than it is around dictating some agile practices. And I do think, building an architectural runway in terms of planning in an agile sense fits in the SAFe framework. It's how you pass through and build a path ahead to ensure that you can better support and ready things like sprint planning, getting a definition of done clearly defined, unblocking people who are working in an agile environment ahead of time so they're not running into complexity.
We've got a questioner who points out you have to have an architect, even in an agile environment. The detail might be fleshed out as you develop your project. Would you agree with that proposition?
I think you've always got to have an architect involved on any project. If you're working as Neil says, in a tribe or a scrum, they're working on a specific outcome usually, or a small piece of work, and depending on who's doing that work, if it's contractors or somebody external coming in or a third party, you're still going to need that governance and control and how that piece of work fits into the larger landscape. So there's always going to be a need for a level of architecture. I agree.
Yeah, reuse is usually important. In a larger agile environment, going back to Lambros's question on business architecture, it's great to devolve architecture nearer to the decision. And I think all architects should be able to support that devolution in terms of working with the individuals as they're making some technology decisions. I've also seen some agile environments whereby some of the technology outcomes were hugely wasteful, duplicative, and drove a huge amount of cost because of the lack of engagement of an architect supporting that enterprise-wide view. So yeah, there's a balance and there's a definite change around architecture, engages in a methodology, but architecture itself still remains. It's just the mechanism of how you do it.
While we're dealing potentially with threats to professional architects, we've been asked, how does cloud impact on the role?
How does cloud impact on the role? It's just another technology area. At the end of the day,
is it still tasks just limited to selecting the tech stack?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a sort of very pragmatic view coming from traditional infrastructure that at the end of the day it's still a server and it's still a network. It's just in somebody else's data center. Yes, there's obviously layers of abstraction above it, but at the end of the day it's still servers and tin. So I think obviously cloud gives us some fantastic capabilities out of the box, and I think allows a business to be more agile in being able to develop and consume capabilities which they wouldn't actually be able to do themselves or build out due to a cost point of view. Going back to Neil's earlier, consuming on an ad hoc basis. So I think that's where cloud adds value. It was a question I was going to ask actually here is, everybody that's moving into cloud from a skill set, or people on here that want to become architects, is there anybody left that still wants to be an infrastructure engineer? Is there? Because just like back 20 years ago, when all mainframes were dying and there were only very few aging engineers left that understood those platforms, yet they were still sat in public services running on a daily basis. Are we going to get to the point where we're going to have a limited resources to be able to maintain these cloud infrastructures because everybody's concentrating on the levels higher up from a development perspective?
Neil, what do you think of Gareth's question about the democratization of architecture? Do you think it's possible for everyone to own the architecture rather than have a dedicated architect?
Yeah, I'm not a big subscriber to ivory tower level architecture. It ties a lot back to disruption and change and things being different, and the role of an architect will become more devolved. I think you'll see is as change starts to take hold, especially like things like cloud and the ability to utilize compute resources rapidly and automated. It just gives people more empowerment. And I do believe that decentralization of technology will see that not just in terms of individuals, but in terms of footprints of where things work. I'd see architecture moving more into a business lens of how you build out technology solutions to support them. It used to be, look at some technologies used to cost a significant amount of capex, and you need to capitalize that over a given period of time. Those days have changed, whereby we're moving to an OPEX model, whereby you can invest a small amount and have great value quickly, very innovative. You do not need to worry about architecting an entire data center up front to get people in a place to engineer anymore. You can give that responsibility devolved to those engineers, whether it's an infrastructure engineer, to Jason's point, or whoever. They can work rapidly in delivering business value. So I think it'll mean that, yeah, it will devolve, and you'll hear a lot more about decentralization of solutions. I think architects will help look at how we decentralize certain things. And certainly in a regulation perspective, certainly in insurance, there's certain regulations that we need to uphold, that we need to show that we're capable of supporting. And things like being locked into a specific technology to support us moving quickly as well. A certain area I'd see architects will need help and support on.
Well, we're nearly out of time, and we've got a nice response from Olu, who says, that you can take the boy out of infrastructure, but you can't take the infrastructure out of the boy. And on that note, Neil, you pointed out that 20 minutes for the Q&A and an hour overall may well not be long enough. And from the number and quality of questions that have been coming in, you are absolutely right. But an hour is what we allocated. So thank you so much to our two speakers, Neil and Jason, for some fascinating insights. We could have kept this conversation, and perhaps should have kept this conversation going for much longer. There'll be a quick question, one question survey following this session when everybody closes their session, asking for a bit of feedback. And in an hour, you will receive another email asking for further thoughts. Please do respond to those. It's very useful for us to know how we can make these sessions even better. And if you think the session should be longer, please tell us. That's really important for us and will help us going forward. Thank you once again to our speakers, and thank you for being here. I hope you found it interesting and enjoyable. Good night.
Thank you. Thanks, John.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.